Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Alejandro Chafuen, president of Atlas Networks and a tireless advocate for liberty all across Latin America. Alex, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure, Bill.
Alex, a lot of strange and confusing things are happening in Latin America. I asked you on to give us a rundown of the region and perhaps share your perspective on what's going right there, what's going wrong, and what the future might hold for our southern neighbors. Let's start with Venezuela. The lights are literally starting to go out, and it's said that they don't even have enough money to pay for printing more money. Pretty soon the bankrupt government won't be able to pay any of its bills. How did Venezuela get to this point?
Venezuela is the most tragic case right now in Latin America. It got to this point by socialism and by many neglecting the early signs of danger, thinking, that it was going to be a temporary government, the government by Chavez. And what has happened is that they have increased the level of socialization year after year. The best thing that happened, and really, if this interview would have taken place a year ago, I would be very, very pessimistic, even worse than now, because we never thought that the military and the regime was going to recognize the victory of the opposition in the poll. Late last year, the vote just by almost 2/3 of the Congress passed to the opposition. And the only reason it's not veto-proof, that the government basically controls the judiciary, made the courts eliminate disqualify four of the congressmen, a few of the congressmen, so they don't have a veto-proof majority. But right now, there is an institutional conflict because each time the Congress decides something, the Maduro government does not comply with what the Congress say. But basically, it's a textbook case of what socialism produced, and even democratic socialism, because supposedly it's a democracy, but I believe that many of the past elections were rigged. And right now, the government has dilapidated all the wealth that it got through the oil company. They have implemented strict price controls, strict exchange controls. It's even difficult to explain to an audience what it means to have an exchange rate that is so ridiculously artificial. It's almost 100 to 1. That means that Venezuela is the cheapest country in the world. If you could exchange, a dollar is 100 to 1, or the most expensive country in the world, because it's basically 10 Venezuelan pesos per dollar in the official market, when it's almost 1,000 in the free market.
Plus, there's rampant inflation, which is fueled by this incessant money printing, which is going to stop now. Apparently, they can't afford to print more money.
That's almost laughable, but it is tragic. The amazing thing is that they have been able to maintain still the control of the country, and we have not had bigger social explosions. We saw when the students were in the streets, and again, I know I was there during the street revolt, and again, I always had to be very careful about how I behave in Venezuela, because I'm vice president of a think tank in Venezuela. But basically, the people have been killed, have been tortured. Many of the students are still in jail. And several of the people who took part in programs in my organization, I work for the Atlas Network. Leopoldo Lopez, the most famous political prisoner, he spoke at some of our events, and he was trying to demonstrate peacefully, but he has been already in jail for a couple of years, which is really sad. But again, I know many people who are in jail right now, and the tragic thing is that we don't see a quick solution to the problem.
Food is running out. Are we likely to see mass starvation soon?
Well, we are already seeing food riots and lootings of all types, from people stealing trucks with cattle to people looting chickens from others. They even run out of water. People have read stories, about toilet paper, but
right.
I have friends who have their mothers there, and then they have to take care of relatives, and even getting water is a problem. People have to hire others to stand in line
to get their water ration.
All types of rations. Perhaps people don't realize that Venezuela, until the 70s, had, the country with less inflation in the Americas, with one of the highest rates of growth, with solid middle class, with outstanding private companies. But many of them, what happened, many of them play the game of what we call today chronic capitalism, rent seekers, people who seek favors from the government. And that weakened a little bit the social fabric. So when this Chavez, this former the military guy who had done a coup, ran for election in the late 90s and took power, he basically got a considerable popular support, but it was playing with fire and the situation continued to deteriorate. And I work with many friends who are trying to liberate the country, but they do it at their own personal risk.
Shifting to an economy that perhaps has more impact on the United States, Brazil is going through a constitutional crisis right now. Justice is facing a Zika epidemic, and justice is preparing to host the Olympics. Can anything get more exciting in Brazil?
Look, if Venezuela is the most tragic situation, Brazil is the most dramatic, because we see the forces in play in the streets, in the Congress, in the corporate world, in the judiciary. The current impeachment, that I think no matter what, the President Dilma Rousseff will have to step down. It has its own angles, because several of the people who are under her and should, by constitution, replace her have their own scandals and problems. Brazil is a half of South American. It's by economic strength and power, and has had negative growth last year and again this year. The danger of a social explosion, is something that frightens everyone in the Americas, but so far everything has been peaceful.
Do you think they'll muddle through?
I think what has happened is that the corporate world, which is, Brazil has many wonderful companies, many of us fly, in their Embraer jets. But they have realized, I think, that if they don't go ahead and support the judge who has been bringing up these cases and let some of them go to jail right now, like the major construction company will be like the Bechtel of the United States, or the Brecht. Those guys are in jail, as well as others who have paid bribes. They say, look, if we don't stop this and we start moving towards rule of law, we are going to end up as Venezuela, and then we all lose. So I think also, banks in the United States have a big exposure to Brazil still. So I think there's a consensus that there has to be a change. I hope that demonstrations, that have been taking place will continue to be peaceful. And eventually, she will step down and there will be a sort of coalition government, and that will fast give signs that Brazil intends to play by rule of law. And again, it's not impossible. Remember that the previous president, Lula, appointed Mayor Ellis, who was former head of Bank Boston, as head of the central bank. Dilma Rousseff also, for a while, had Joaquim Levy, who was a Chicago boy, as minister. So it's not impossible, but I think the tide has turned and the situation is set for a change in government.
The Olympics are right around the corner. Are they going to get their act together in time?
I think so. I think they will. I think they will go ahead. Right now, I don't think they will be canceled.
So, Alex, let's shift our attention to Argentina. After a very long struggle, Argentina is finally paying off its holdout bondholders and returning to the global economic community. Is this a sign that its economy is getting ready to rebound after years of inflation, corruption, and mismanagement?
The signs in Argentina are very good in many aspects, but as you said, the word that I used to define the situation in Argentina is intriguing, and it's still difficult. There has never been an elected president in Argentina since the advent of Peronism in the 1940s who was able to finish its mandate. So some of the first measures that the current president took, like unifying the exchange rate, lowering some taxes, I think were very positive. And as you said, the recent agreement with the holdouts, the last creditors of Argentina, helped Argentina come back to the credit market. It was hard to expect, that the Peronists were going to lose in a province that they always held power, that is the province of Buenos Aires, and that tipped the balance towards an administration that is basically, in the United States, will be defined as center-left. Here they describe it as center-right. But I really like the ministers that they have chosen for Minister of Justice, people working in rule of law, in security, are all people that I know by first name, and some of them even have won awards from the organization I work for, the Atlas Network. So it's a welcome sign, but should not be confused with a huge turn towards free market or libertarian thinking. What we're seeing in Latin America is people saying no to the consolidation of left-wing populism more than a libertarian revolution. And all this has been helped by a decline in the rate of growth of the region, which suddenly the governments run out of money to give away, and so they're seeing their political base weaken.
But this is not a good news story everywhere. Chile long stood as a perfect example of how you can turn an economy around with free enterprise, and yet you recently called it the saddest economy in Latin America. Why?
Because the civil society has done many things very, very well. No other country in the region was able to reduce poverty so much. Chile climbed to be one of the top 20 economies in economic freedom. It also has measurement of rule of law comparable to some of the best countries in the world. But nevertheless, there was like a perfect storm that the left took advantage of and took power with a complete different message, pushing for equality. Equality was the mantra, the President Bachelet used to win this time. Right. They have been called to reverse many of the reforms. Some people think this is growth pains. Now the country's rich, so people want not only the freedom to choose, but the guarantee that if they choose bad, the government will help them.
Right.
So other people think that the reforms did not have a strong philosophical support, inspiration of fighting for freedom rather than just for free market. But I am optimistic that in the medium term, the Chilean situation will turn around because I see people have been filling the voids in all those efforts to reach different constituencies with the message of freedom and free markets. But it's sad because we thought that it was over, that
the battle was won.
Yeah, but this proves Ronald Reagan's statement, we're always one generation away from losing our freedom. Hopefully it will not be the case, and Friends of Freedom will be able to regain positions in government and return Chile to the path of economic growth. Economic growth has slowed dramatically in Chile under this new socialist government.
I know generalizations are limited, but what is it about the Latin American character that makes redistributionist regulatory states so appealing?
I do not know if it's just the Latin American character. If you imagine a century ago, you would ask me this question. Latin America was the land of hope. Everyone was saying this is the land of the future. My relatives came to Argentina from Europe, and from the best countries of Europe. So what happened, I believe, is that it took time and still for Latin American countries to incorporate into the formal economy people who have never been able to have secure property titles. Latin America has, in some countries, has a huge native population. Bolivia, 60% of the population is still indigenous, almost 40% in Guatemala. Chile is 4.6. Argentina, Brazil have very few indigenous people. But many times those people were neglected, and when democracy began to be understood as winner takes all, in a sort of the majority rule, it was very easy for populists to say, look how the rich live, look how poor you live, and then promote giveaways in order to win votes. So I would say this is more an institutional issue rather than something that will ever be like that. My native country, Argentina, from 1853 to 1940s, was one of the fastest growing countries in the world. And each time Latin Americans tried freedom, it worked. The thing is, how can you avoid populists getting in power, and offering giveaways, to the redistribution in order to win power and consolidate power and try to remain in power forever, like this has happened, in some Latin American countries where there were dynasties that lasted more than 50 years, like in Paraguay, in Mexico, we had a party for 71 years in power.
Well, let's switch to Mexico. We haven't spoken about that yet. It's the southern neighbor the U.S. is most involved with. Net migration from Mexico to the U.S. has dropped as the U.S. economy stagnated and anti-immigrant rhetoric heated up. They seem to be doing okay there now. Give us an update.
Well, the new president, although coming from the left of the old party that Mario Vargas Llosa, a good friend, called the perfect dictatorship, decided to liberalize some sectors, especially the sector of energy, which was, like a sacrament, something that you could not touch, because the state had a dominant role in that. And that created a lot of optimism. They also tried to do some educational reforms. So it's a gradual process. Mexico is growing, a little bit faster than the United States. Its economy has been integrated a lot with the United States. I think, unlike a leading political candidate in the United States, I think that NAFTA was very positive. We are still not there, that there's always a danger, that a worse populist will get in power. The most difficult thing that they have is rule of law, especially at state level, at provincial level. The power of the drug traffickers still continues to be immense. But some of the liberalization that took place in the United States regarding marijuana, for example, has really reduced the income of this
the drug lords.
Cartels, the cartels. So that's something that I think it takes time to have an effect in the entire country. But I am very optimistic for Mexico in the medium term. And that's good news for the United States. It's good to have neighbors that do good. And
good to have healthy neighbors. Hey, let's wrap up with Cuba, which is the last outright communist dictatorships outside of North Korea. President Obama has plunged into a relationship with the Castro brothers, hoping to open things up before his presidency ends. Would the Cuban people have been better off if we waited for the Castros to die before empowering his henchmen with lucrative contracts and trade deals?
I have been canvassing the opinion of some of the Cubans that take part in programs that some of the think tanks, work with, organize. And I better reflect what they believe. Any sign of opening, they look at it with optimism. They still think, that the situation is very bad. So a few of them think that this is just a shooting star. They think that the visit of President Obama and some of this sign gives them an opportunity for change and to be more daring in defending and demanding more rights in Cuba.
How has the situation for Cuban dissidents and refuseniks improved since Obama launched his initiative?
It improved really very little. President Obama asked, and the administration asked for very little in return. And that is the saddest part of this change, that it was sort of unilateral. And even few days after President Obama left, even Fidel Castro basically saying, look, there's nothing we need from you. We are the greatest country in the earth. And recently, just in the last Communist Party convention, he basically again said how proud he was of the communist revolution and only the problem that has been betrayed after 70 years, but long live Lenin, the revolution.
Right.
The last friends I met, I saw them, they were beaten and taken to jail for a while. They changed the tactics. Instead of putting you in jail for a long time, they keep you there for 5 hours and they constantly harass you. So there are some new lines of communication. And, as a believer in freedom and unforeseen, unintended consequences, we think some of the results might be good.
What do you make of Obama posing in front of a giant picture of Che Guevara?
Now, that was tragic. The Cubans have participated in training and giving coverage and support to terrorists in Latin America. And the Che Guevara came from a native country, was a ruthless killer. He said that hatred, especially hatred to the United States, is a great motivator and they have to kill to be respected. So for me, that was very sad. And for everyone who has victims, suffered attacks from terrorists, and lost relatives or limbs, due to these attacks, that was very sad.
You've talked about the dangerous alliance between crony socialists and crony capitalists and actually predicted that for Cuba's future. How does that work?
Well, I began studying what happened in the Soviet Union, after it fell, and how communists were able, as they had such great intelligence services and knew where the bodies are buried, put it that way, how they captured assets all around the region. And the way that this works, there's almost nothing you can do still in Cuba without agreement of the Communist Party and the military. But with their support, you can earn money and have secure profits, because you have any problem, by decree, they can dismiss people or change prices. And that might be attractive for some people who will like to be partners with them. When we spoke about Brazil, I spoke about Odebrecht, which is a construction company that loves to deal with dictators.
Yep.
And they had a major presence in Cuba. And I was joking, in the same way of that Putin put Schroeder, the former German chancellor, in Gazprom and in his companies as chairman, I wouldn't have been surprised to have Odebrecht with a Cuban dictatorship put Obama or someone of his administrations on the board. And so monitoring that, I think, is for those of us who love true freedom, the free economy, and not this crony deals between people who we can call them capitalists, whatever you want to call them, but who makes deal with dictators. I think we have to monitor that very carefully so that it does not happen. And if it happens, we shame them,
Well, Alex, I appreciate you spending time with us today, taking us on a bit of a tour across Latin America. I wish your organization all the luck in the world trying to sort things out down there. Thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome, Bill.
That was Alejandro Chafuen, president of Atlas Networks, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And while you're at it, take a look at realclearmarkets.com, my go-to place for diverse views on political economics. We'd like to thank our long-term sponsor, Old Boston Restorations, for their support. Old Boston is a boutique property management company in Boston South End. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.